Abigail Turner dropped to her knees in the burning summer dust. The flour sack split open beside her like a wound. Her hands shook. Her chest heaved. And the whole town of Dust Hollow watched her bleed and laughed. "Workhorse in a dress," a man hollered. "Lord didn't make her. He poured her." Another shouted. She didn't look up, didn't cry, didn't speak. She just kept gathering what the world had already decided wasn't worth saving. Then a shadow fell across her shaking shoulders. A cowboy dismounted slow, and Ethan Cole said one word: "Stop." If this story breaks something open in you, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel and follow Abigail's journey all the way to the end, because what happens to her in the next 2 hours is going to change the way you look at every woman who's ever been told she was too much. And down in the comments, tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel from Texas to Tennessee, from Ohio to Oregon. Now, let's go back to that summer afternoon in Dust Hollow, the day a heavy woman fell in the dirt, and a quiet cowboy refused to walk past her. The laughter didn't stop when Ethan Cole said, "Stop." It got louder. Abigail kept her eyes on the dirt. She kept her bleeding hand moving palm down, fingers, curled sweeping flour back toward the torn sack, like a woman trying to gather up the last hours of her own life. "Reckon she'll need 2 wagons to haul herself home," a voice called from the boardwalk. 3. Another answered. 1 for her, 1 for the flour, and 1 for whatever's left of her pride. The crowd howled. Ethan Cole didn't move. He stood beside his bay mare with the rein still in his fist, and he turned his head slow, the way a man turns when he's measuring how many men he might have to hit. His eyes passed over the boardwalk, over the saloon door, over the 2 old men playing checkers outside the feed store. Every man he looked at went quiet. He stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said. Abigail didn't answer. "Ma'am, let me—" "Don't." Her voice was low, steady, the kind of steady a woman gets when she's been broken so many times the cracks have learned how to hold their shape. "Ma'am, your hand's bleedin'." "I know what my hand's doin'." "Let me get the flour then. You don't gotta—" "I said don't." She lifted her face for the first time. Her hair had come loose from the pins. There was sweat on her forehead and flour on her jaw, and a smear of red across her cheekbone where she'd wiped her hand without thinking. But her eyes weren't crying. Her eyes were dry and dark and burning like a stove banked for winter. "Cowboy," she said, "I don't know who raised you, but where I come from, a man asking to help a woman 3 times after she said no ain't a gentleman. He's just another man trying to feel good about himself." Ethan Cole opened his mouth, closed it, tipped his hat back an inch, and looked at her like she'd hit him in the chest with the flat of a shovel. Behind him, somebody whistled. "Hooey, Ethan, she just put your saddle on backwards." Cowboy got whipped by the wheat sack widow. The laughter came back twice as loud. Abigail kept gathering. The flour was ruined now. Most of it had soaked up the dust, the horse droppings, the spit. But she kept gathering anyway, because gathering was the only thing in the whole town of Dust Hollow she was still allowed to do without permission. A boot stepped into her line of sight. Polished. Black. Silver spur. She didn't have to look up to know whose boot it was. "Mrs. Turner," Victor Hale said. "On your knees in the street. Again." She kept her eyes on the dirt. "Mr. Hale? You missed our meeting." "I didn't miss it. I declined it." "There's a difference." "There is when a woman's the one talkin'." The boot didn't move. She could feel him looming. She could feel the whole town leaning forward on the boardwalk, breath held because Victor Hale was the kind of man you watched the way you watched a rattler, not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't afford not to. "Mrs. Turner," he said, soft as silk. "Your husband's been dead 2 summers. The bank's been patient. I've been patient. But the note on that quarter section of yours comes due Friday next, and I aim to collect. You'll collect what's owed, not a penny more. What's owed, ma'am, is the whole parcel, and we both know you can't make the payment. Then we both know you'll be disappointed." Somebody on the boardwalk laughed short, sharp, and nervous. Hale didn't laugh. He squatted down, slow, until his polished black boots were resting on his heels, and his elbows were on his knees, and his face was level with hers. "Look at me, Abigail." "Don't call me that. Look at me." She looked. Victor Hale had a face like a man who'd learned to smile in front of a mirror until he got it right. Clean-shaven, hair oiled back, eyes the color of pond water in a drought. "You're tired," he said. "I'm workin'. You're broken. I'm kneelin'. There's a difference. Sell to me, Abigail. I'll give you a fair price. You can take the money, take a room at the boarding house, take a position at the dressmaker's. Lord knows that woman could use a seamstress with hands as fast as yours. You'd never have to lift another sack of flour in your life." "I'd never have to lift another thing, you mean?" "I mean you'd be cared for. By you. By the arrangement. Mr. Hale." She set the empty sack down. She put both her bleeding palms flat on her thighs, and she leaned forward until her face was 6 inches from his. "My husband built that homestead with his own 2 hands. He plowed that soil. He dug that well. He died in that bed. And the day I sell 1 square inch of his ground to a man who never put a callus on his fingers in his whole oil-slick life, that's the day you can put me in the dirt beside him." Hale's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Something that hadn't been smiling in the first place. "You don't want me as an enemy, Mrs. Turner." "I don't want you as anything, Mr. Hale." "That's a shame. Because Friday's comin' whether you want it or not." He stood up. He brushed the dust off his trousers, slow, deliberate, like he wanted every man on the boardwalk to see him doing it. And then he tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am." He turned and walked away. His silver spurs sang against the boards as he went up onto the porch of the bank, and the door swung shut behind him with the kind of soft click that sounded like a key turning in a lock. The street went quiet. Abigail Turner stayed on her knees. She'd held it together for Hale. She'd held it together for the town. She'd held it together for the laughing men and the whispering women and the children peeking out from behind their mothers' skirts. But now the porch door was shut, and Hale was gone, and her hand was bleeding into her dress, and the flour was ruined, and the wagon plank was broken, and she had $4.62 to her name and a note on the homestead that came due in 11 days. Her shoulders started to shake. She didn't let them. She picked up the empty sack. She folded it once. She folded it again. She tucked it under her arm. She put her hand on the broken wagon plank, and she pushed herself up, knees first, then thighs, then hips, the way a woman pushes up off the floor when she's been kneeling at a sickbed for 3 days straight. Her left knee gave out. She caught herself on the wagon. The wagon creaked. The mule, old Jericho, gray-muzzled and half-blind, turned his big, sorrowful head and looked at her like he'd been carrying her grief longer than she had. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "Easy. We're going home." A hand appeared on the wagon rail beside hers. A man's hand. Brown. Calloused. 2 knuckles split where they'd been broken and badly set. She didn't look up. "I told you, Cowboy." "I ain't askin'," Ethan Cole said. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm liftin'." He didn't lift her. He lifted the wagon. He'd come around to the broken corner without a word, and he set his shoulder under the busted plank and pushed up so old Jericho could shift his weight and the load could resettle, and he held it there, held the entire weight of her ruined morning on his back until she got her hands free of it. She stared at him. "Why?" she said. "Why what, ma'am? Why are you doing this?" Ethan Cole didn't answer for a long moment. He had hazel eyes closer to green when the sun hit them closer to brown in the shade, and right now they were brown. "My mama used to carry flour up a hill twice a week," he said finally. "From the mill in Beaver Creek to our place, 8 miles. She had a bad hip after my brother was born, and she carried it anyway. One day she fell, right in the middle of the road. There was a man in a buckboard who saw her fall, and he drove right past. He shifted the plank on his shoulder. I told myself when I was 9 years old that if I ever saw a woman down on her knees in a road, I wasn't going to be that man in the buckboard. So I ain't asking your permission, ma'am. Not because I don't respect you, but because I respect my mama more." Abigail Turner had not cried in 2 summers. She did not cry now, but something behind her sternum cracked soft, slow, the way ice cracks on a pond in the first warm wind of spring, and she looked away from him fast, because she could feel the crack widening, and she did not have the strength to hold it together if it broke open. "Cole," she said. "Ma'am?" "You done good." She climbed up onto the wagon seat. The wagon groaned under her weight, the way it always did, and she heard somebody snicker on the boardwalk behind her, and she did not turn to see who. Ethan Cole stepped back from the wagon. He tipped his hat to her. "Mrs. Turner." "Mr. Cole." She slapped the reins. Old Jericho leaned into the harness. The wagon creaked forward past the saloon, past the bank, past the feed store where the 2 old men had stopped pretending to play checkers and were watching her go. She did not look back. She did not look back when she heard the boardwalk start whispering again. She did not look back when she heard a woman say, "Would you look at her ridin' off like she's somebody?" She did not look back when she heard a man laugh and another man tell him to shut your mouth. She did not look back when she felt Ethan Cole's eyes on the back of her neck for 2 whole blocks. She looked back exactly once. She looked back when she got to the edge of town where the road bent around the cottonwoods and Dust Hollow disappeared behind her shoulder. And what she saw was Ethan Cole still standing in the middle of the street where she'd left him with his hat in his hand and the sun on his face, watching her ride out the way a man watches a thing he's afraid he'll never see again. She turned her eyes forward. She did not let herself look back twice. The road home was 4 miles of nothing. Cottonwoods, then prairie, then more prairie, then the bend where the creek ran shallow under the wooden bridge her husband had built the summer before he died. She let old Jericho take it slow. She let the heat settle on her shoulders. She let the silence do what the laughter had not been able to do. She wept. She wept without making a sound. She wept with both hands on the reins and her face pointed straight ahead and her shoulders shaking like a woman in a fever. She wept for the flour. She wept for the $4.62. She wept for Friday and for the homestead and for the husband who'd been dead 2 summers and had no idea what they were doing to the wife he'd left behind. She wept for Ethan Cole's mama falling in a road in Beaver Creek with a man in a buckboard driving past. By the time she crossed the bridge, she was done weeping. By the time she turned into the homestead lane, she was Abigail Turner again. She unhitched Jericho. She rubbed him down. She gave him the last of the good oats and apologized to him for there not being more. She walked the broken wagon to the barn and looked at the busted plank and did the math in her head. A new plank was 40 cents at the lumber yard, and 40 cents was 9% of every dollar she had in the world. She walked into the kitchen. She stood at the basin. She poured water over her bleeding hand and watched the pink swirl down the drain, and she said out loud to no one, in the voice of a woman who had finally run out of other people to say it to, "I have been on my knees long enough." She said it once. She let it settle. She said it again. "I have been on my knees long enough." And then a 3rd time harder with her bleeding hand flat against the basin. "I have been on my knees long enough." The kitchen did not answer, but somewhere behind her the screen door creaked. She turned. There was a man standing on her porch. Not Ethan Cole. A boy, 15, maybe 16, raw-boned and barefoot, with a folded paper in his fist, and a horse standing winded in her yard. "Mrs. Turner," the boy said. "Who's askin'?" "Mr. Hale, ma'am. Said to deliver this. Said you'd want to read it before sundown." He held out the paper. Abigail Turner did not move. "Boy," she said, "how much did he pay you to ride out here?" "A nickel, ma'am." "Then you ride back and tell him I gave you a dime to take it home unread." She crossed the kitchen. She opened the cookie tin on the windowsill, the one her husband had kept his pipe tobacco in, the one she now kept her last coins in, and she fished out a dime. A whole dime. 10% of what she had left in the world. She pressed it into the boy's palm. "Tell him," she said, "Mrs. Turner doesn't read mail from men who threaten her in the street." The boy stared at the dime. He stared at her. He stared at the unopened paper in his other hand. Then he closed his fist around the dime, and he tucked the paper into his shirt, and he ran for his horse, like a boy who'd just been given a story he'd be telling his children 50 years from now. Abigail Turner stood on her porch. She watched him ride. She listened until the hoofbeats were gone, and then she listened to the prairie wind in the cottonwoods, and then she listened to her own heart, which was beating slower and steadier than it had any right to be. Friday was 11 days away. She had $4.52. She had a broken wagon, a half-blind mule, a homestead with a poisoned well she hadn't told a soul about, and a hand that was going to need stitching before nightfall. She had no husband. She had no kin. She had no friend in Dust Hollow who hadn't laughed at her in the street that morning. What she had was a cowboy who'd once watched his mama fall in a road, and a fire in her chest that had just finished saying 3 times, "I have been on my knees long enough." She walked back into the kitchen. She picked up her sewing kit. She threaded the needle with her teeth because her left hand was the one that was bleeding, and she sat down at the kitchen table and she pushed the needle through the meat of her own palm without making a sound. 1 stitch, 2, 3. When she was done, she tied off the thread. She bit it clean. She wrapped the hand in clean muslin. She stood up from the table. She walked to the front window. She looked out across the prairie, across her husband's quarter section, across the wheat that was almost ready to harvest across the well, that she now suspected had been poisoned by a man with polished black boots and a smile he'd practiced in a mirror. And Abigail Turner, 304 pounds of widow and grief and prairie iron, said the words that would carry her through every single thing that was coming. Friday can come. A pause. I'll be standin' when it does. Sundown came slow over the homestead, and Abigail Turner did not sit down once. She walked the wheat first. 40 acres her husband had broken with his own back, and she walked every fence line of it with a lantern in her good hand, and the wrap on her bad one already soaked through pink. She was looking for tracks. She was looking for trampling. She was looking for any sign that a man with polished boots had sent another man with worn boots to do the kind of work polished boots don't do. She found it on the north fence. Hoofprints, 2 horses, shod. They had come in through the gap by the cottonwoods, and they had ridden a long, slow circle through the standing wheat, not enough to ruin a crop, but enough to ruin a woman, because the wheat that had been crushed was the wheat she'd planned to sell first, the early-headed strain her husband had bred himself. "Hail," she said to the dark. Old Jericho whickered from the barn. She turned the lantern toward the house, and she walked back with the wind at her shoulder, and she said it 3 more times under her breath, the way a woman says a name when she's deciding what to do with it. Hail, hail, hail. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with her husband's old Colt in her lap, and the lantern turned low, and she watched the door, and she watched the window, and at some point, around 3 in the morning, she opened the cookie tin again and counted her money for the 4th time. $4.52, the dime to the boy. The 40 cents for the wagon plank she hadn't bought yet. The $2 she owed the mill. The 70 cents she owed the doctor for a visit 8 months back when she'd nearly lost a finger to a busted churn. What was left after all of it was $1.42. $1.42 and 11 days and a homestead. She did not weep. She had wept enough on the road from town. A woman who had wept all her crying in one afternoon was a woman who had her hands free for the morning. And morning came, whether Abigail Turner was ready for it or not. She was at the well at first light. She was not ready for what she found. The cattle had come up in the night. Not all of them, just the 2 milk cows and the steer she'd been fattening for fall, and the 2 milk cows were lying on their sides in the dirt by the trough, and one of them was already stiff, and the other was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps with white foam crusted on her muzzle. Abigail Turner dropped to her knees for the 2nd time in 2 days. This time, she did not get up fast. "Bess," she whispered. "Bess. Oh, girl. Oh, girl, no." The cow's eye rolled toward her. There was nothing in it. There was the kind of nothing that a cow's eye gets when the cow is already most of the way to the other side, and Abigail Turner put her good hand on the cow's neck, and she felt the heat going out of the hide beneath her palm. "Who did this to you?" she said. "Who did this to you, baby girl? Who did this?" She knew who. She had known since the morning a week ago when she'd drawn a bucket from the well, and the water had come up smelling faintly of something she couldn't place, something sweet underneath the cold, something almost like rotten apples. She had not drunk from the well since. She had been hauling water in jars from the creek. She had told herself she was being cautious. She had told herself the smell would pass. The smell had not passed. The smell had killed her milk cow. She stood up. Her knees popped. She walked back to the house with her good hand pressed flat against her chest and the bad one hanging loose at her side, and she stood in the kitchen, and she said one sentence out loud to the empty room. "He came on my land." A pause. "He came on my land." A pause. "And he poisoned the well." She walked to the wall where her husband's gun belt still hung on the peg. She had not touched it in 2 summers. The leather was stiff. The buckle was tarnished. She lifted it down with her good hand, and she fastened it around her hips with her teeth and her one working set of fingers, and she settled the Colt against her thigh and walked out onto the porch. That was when she heard the hoofbeats. One horse. Coming hard up the lane. She did not move. She did not reach for the gun. She just stood on her porch with her hand on the post, and she watched the rider come, and when he was close enough for her to see his face, she said very quiet, "Cole." Ethan Cole reined up in her yard. His horse was lathered. His hat was pushed back. His shirt was dark with sweat down the front like he'd been riding since before sunup. "Mrs. Turner," he said. "Mr. Cole. Your hand." "My hand's fine." "Your hand is bleedin' through the wrap, ma'am." "Then it's a good thing it ain't your hand." He swung down off the horse. He did not ask permission. He walked up to her porch with his reins in his fist, and he stopped at the bottom step, and he did not climb it because climbing a woman's porch step uninvited was the kind of thing a man did when he wanted to lose teeth. "Mrs. Turner." "What?" "I rode out here to ask you something, and I'm going to ask it. And you can say no, and I'll get back on this horse, and I won't trouble you again." "Then ask it." "I need a hand." "I beg your pardon." "On my place. North of the bend. 400 acres, and I'm running it with one boy and a lame horse, and the boy ain't worth what I'm paying him, and the horse ain't worth what I'm feeding her. I need somebody who knows wheat. I need somebody who knows mules. I need somebody who knows how to keep a ledger so the bank don't eat me alive come October." A pause. "And I've been asking around town 3 weeks for a man who knows all 3 things, and there ain't one. There's one person in this county who knows all 3 things, Mrs. Turner, and she's standing on this porch with a gun belt that don't fit her, and a hand that's going to go septic by Tuesday if she don't let somebody clean it." Abigail Turner did not move. Then she said, "You came out here to offer me a job." "Yes, ma'am." "At your place?" "Yes, ma'am." "After what happened in town yesterday." "Because of what happened in town yesterday, ma'am." She studied him. She studied him the way a woman studies a horse she's thinking about buying. She looked at his hands. She looked at his boots. She looked at the way he stood square, even weight on both feet, neither one ready to step toward her or away from her. She looked at the worn place on his belt where a holster had hung for a long time and didn't anymore. "Cole," she said. "Ma'am." "Are you a married man?" "No, ma'am." "Are you a drinking man?" "Was. Ain't anymore." "Are you the kind of man who hires a woman because he can't get one of his own?" His jaw moved. "No, ma'am. I am not." "Then what kind of man are you?" A long pause. "I'm the kind of man," he said slow, "who watched his mama fall in a road and spent the last 18 years trying to figure out what to do with his hands so they'd never be empty again when a woman needed liftin'." Abigail Turner closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a count of 3. When she opened them again, her voice was different, lower, less guarded. The voice of a woman who had decided something and was now living with the deciding. "My milk cow's dead, Cole." He didn't answer. "My other milk cow is dying in my barn. My steer is going to be next. My well is poisoned, and I have known it was poisoned for 9 days, and I have not told a soul, because there is not a soul in Dust Hollow who would believe me over Victor Hale. My wheat got rode through last night by 2 men on shod horses. My wagon plank is busted. My notes due Friday. I have $1.42 to my name. And the only reason I am still standing on this porch instead of on my knees in that yard is that I told myself yesterday I was done kneeling. She drew a breath. So you tell me, Cole. You tell me real plain. Did Victor Hale send you out here this morning? Ethan Cole's face went still. It went still the way a pond goes still right before a fish breaks the surface, and Abigail Turner saw it go still, and her good hand drifted half an inch closer to the Colt on her hip, without her telling it to. "No, ma'am," he said. "Hale did not send me." "Look at me when you say it." He looked at her. "Hale did not send me, Mrs. Turner. Have you ever worked for him?" A pause. "Yes." Her hand went the rest of the way to the Colt. "Cole, hear me out. Get off my land. Mrs. Turner, hear me out. You worked for him, and you came out here on the day after he threatened me in the street to offer me a job, and you expect me to— I worked for him 6 years ago, for 4 months, and I quit when I figured out what he was, and I have not spoke a word to that man since the day I walked off his porch and told him to his face he was the worst kind of a coward this country ever made. Now you can put a bullet in me, Mrs. Turner, or you can let me finish, but you cannot do both." She did not put a bullet in him. She did not take her hand off the Colt either. "Talk fast, Cole." "He's been doing this for 10 years. "Doing what?" "Doing this. What he's doing to you. He did it to the Mercer widow north of Cottonwood Creek in 76. He did it to the McGowan widow in Bent Fork in 78. He did it to Etta Calloway out by the rail spur in 81, and Etta Calloway hung herself in her own barn 3 weeks before he took the deed, and they buried her in unconsecrated ground, because the preacher said it was a sin, and Hale was at the auction for her property the next week, ma'am. He bid on her own land while her grave was still settling." Abigail Turner's mouth was open. She did not know when it had opened. "He poisons the well," Cole said. "Every time. Same trick. Sweet smell, slow kill takes the cattle first. Then he rides through the crop. Then he sends a man with papers. Then he buys the place for 10 cents on the dollar and resells it to the railroad, and the railroad pays him 40 cents on the dollar. And that's how a man with no land of his own becomes the 3rd richest man in the territory in 8 years. How do you know this?" "Because I'm the one he sent the first time." The porch went quiet. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Old Jericho, somewhere behind the barn, blew out a long, sorrowful breath. "Cole, I rode through the Mercer widow's wheat, Mrs. Turner. I was 23 years old, and I was drunk most of a year, and I needed the money, and I rode through her wheat in the middle of the night, and I told myself it was just wheat. I did not poison her well. I would not do that. But I rode through her wheat, and I took his money for it, and 4 months later they buried her, and I have not had a drink since the day I heard her name read at the funeral. You're telling me this now. I'm telling you this now because if you don't hear it from me, you'll hear it from him by Wednesday, and he'll twist it so it's the worst thing you ever heard, and you'll put me off your land, and you'll be alone again, and he will take this place from you, ma'am. He will take it. He has done it 11 times that I know about. He will do it to you. And what do you get out of telling me? I get to sleep, ma'am. That's it. That's it. That's not enough, Cole. It is for me." She took her hand off the Colt. She did not invite him up the step. But she took her hand off the Colt, and she leaned her shoulder against the porch post, and she looked at this man, this 30-something cowboy with hazel eyes and split knuckles, and a confession in his throat, the way a woman looks at a road she has not decided whether to walk down yet. "Cole, ma'am, if I take this job, yes, ma'am, it is not because I trust you. No, ma'am. It is because I am out of options, and you are the only man in this county who has told me the truth about Victor Hale in 2 summers, and a woman with 11 days and $1.42 cannot afford to throw away the only truth-teller she's got. Yes, ma'am. There will be terms. Name 'em. You will pay me cash, weekly, end of every Saturday. $2 a day, 6 days a week. $12 a week. In my hand, Cole. Not on a ledger, not on credit. In my hand. Done. You will not touch me. You will not put a hand on my shoulder. You will not put a hand on my back. You will not put your hand on the small of my back when you walk past me in a doorway. You will not stand close enough to me that I can smell your soap. If a man on your place disrespects me, your boy, your hired hand, your foreman, your anybody, I handle it. Not you, me. With my own hands and my own words, and you do not step in unless I ask you to step in, and I will not ask you to step in. Done. And Cole. Ma'am. If I find out you lied to me about Hale, about the Mercer widow, about the 4 months, about the day in the 4 months, if I find out you have shaved 1 inch of the truth in any direction, yes, ma'am, I will not put a bullet in you. No. I will go to Etta Calloway's grave, and I will tell her what you did, and I will let her tell you. Ethan Cole took his hat off. He held it in front of his chest with both hands like a man at a funeral. Mrs. Turner, he said. Mr. Cole, you got a deal. She nodded once. She turned to go back into the house. She got as far as the screen door when he said, almost too quiet to hear, Ma'am. What? Your other cow. What about her? You let me put her down, please. You shouldn't have to do that. Not with that hand. Abigail Turner stood with her good hand on the screen door. For 2 long heartbeats, she did not answer. Then she said without turning around, Use the rifle in this barn. Not the Colt. The Colt was my husband's. Yes, ma'am. And Cole. Ma'am? Thank you. She went into the house. She closed the screen door behind her. She walked into the kitchen, and she sat down at the table, and she put her head in her good hand, and for 1 long minute, she did not move at all. Then the rifle shot came from the barn. She flinched. She did not cry. She got up. She walked to the window. She watched Ethan Cole walk her dying milk cow's body to the back lot with old Jericho on a halter. And she watched him dig a hole, a real hole, deep enough square-cornered, the kind of hole a man digs when he respects the thing he is burying. And she watched him take his hat off again, before he laid the cow into it. A man takes his hat off for a cow. She thought that is a man who knows what a woman is worth. She did not know yet whether she could trust him. She knew she could use him. That would have to be enough for Friday. She was just turning away from the window when she heard the second set of hoofbeats coming up the lane. 2 horses this time, coming slow, coming the way men come when they want to be seen coming. She walked back to the porch. She did not bring the colt. She did not need to. The 2 riders came up out of the cottonwoods and stopped at her gate. The first one was a boy of about 19, narrow-faced with a hat too big for him and a rifle across his saddle. The second one was older, 30 maybe, heavy through the shoulders, a scar from his right ear down into his collar. And on his left hip, in a tooled leather holster, Abigail Turner had seen exactly once before at a horse auction in Bent Fork 4 summers ago, where a man had shot another man over a piebald mare, a pearl-handled revolver. She knew that revolver. Every woman in 3 counties knew that revolver. It belonged to Cassius Doyle, and Cassius Doyle did not work for himself. Cassius Doyle worked for Victor Hale. Mrs. Turner, Doyle called. Pleasant mornin'? Mr. Doyle? Mr. Hale was wonderin' if you'd had a chance to read his letter. I have not. He thought you might say that. He sent me out here to read it to you. I am not interested, Mr. Doyle. You ain't heard it yet, ma'am. I do not need to. Cassius Doyle smiled. It was not a smile. It was the shape a man's mouth makes when he is about to do something and wants the woman in front of him to know it is coming. He swung down off his horse. Abigail Turner heard very faint the sound of the barn door opening behind her. She did not turn. She did not have to. She knew the sound of Ethan Cole's boots on the dirt of her yard the way she had known 8 summers ago the sound of her husband's boots on the dirt of the same yard. Cole walked up onto the porch and stopped beside her. He did not put a hand on her back. He did not put a hand on her shoulder. He stood beside her with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his hat tipped down over his eyes, and he said in a voice she had not heard him use yet, "Mornin', Cassius." Doyle stopped halfway across the yard. Cole, you're a long way from home. So are you. I'm where I'm supposed to be. You working for the widow now. She's working for me, Doyle, as of about 10 minutes ago, which means anything you got to say to her, you can say to me. And anything you got to do to her, you can try to do to me first. The boy on the second horse shifted his rifle. Cole did not look at him. Son, Cole said still, without looking. You point that long gun any closer to this porch, and I am going to take it off you, and I am going to feed it to your horse, and I do not give one good damn whose payroll you're on. The boy froze. Cassius Doyle watched. Cassius Doyle was not a man who moved fast. He was a man who moved when he had counted what he was moving toward. And Abigail Turner could see him counting now, counting Cole, counting the porch, counting the angle from the gate to the door, counting the woman with the bandaged hand, and the gun belt that didn't fit. He counted for a long time, then he smiled the not smile again. Mr. Hale, he said, is gonna want to know about this development. You tell him, Cole said. I will. And Cassius. Cole. You tell him something else for me. You tell him Ethan Cole sends his regards, and you tell him Ethan Cole remembers the Mercer widow's name. Margaret. Margaret Ann Mercer. She had 2 boys and a baby girl, and they live up by Fort Collins now with her sister, and one of them boys is going to be 20 next spring. You tell Mr. Hale I remember Cassius. You tell him that exact word. Remember. He'll know what it means. Cassius Doyle's not smile slipped half an inch, just half. But Abigail Turner saw it slip, and she would remember the slipping of it for the rest of her life, because it was the first time in 2 summers she had seen a man on Victor Hale's payroll look afraid. Doyle got back on his horse. He turned the horse without another word. The boy with the rifle turned his horse too, and the boy's face was white, and the boy could not have been older than the older of the Mercer widow's 2 sons would be next spring, and Abigail Turner watched the 2 of them ride out of her yard and around the bend in the cottonwoods, and she did not breathe until they were gone. When she breathed, it came out shaking. Cole. Ma'am. What did he mean? Remember. It was the last thing I said to Hale 6 years ago. When I quit, I said I'm going to remember every name Victor, every widow, every well, every wheat field. I'm going to remember, and the day, I think you forgot I remember, is the day I show up on your porch. And then I walked out, and he ain't seen me since. And now he knows you're here. Now he knows I'm here. Cole. Ma'am. That changes things. Yes, ma'am. It does. He won't wait till Friday. No, ma'am. He'll come now. Yes, ma'am. She turned toward him. She looked up into his face. She had not stood this close to a man in 2 summers, and she did not move closer now, but she did not move away either, and she said in a voice that was steady, the way a hand on a rifle is steady, "Then we'd better not be standing on this porch when he gets here." Ethan Cole did not smile. He nodded once. He tipped his hat to her. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "let's go to work." They went to work. Cole took the barn. Abigail took the house. They split the homestead the way 2 people split a thing when they have decided without saying so that one set of hands is not going to be enough for what is coming. She loaded her husband's Colt at the kitchen table. She loaded his Winchester. She loaded the little belly gun he had bought her the summer before he died, the one she had never carried, because she had not believed until yesterday that there was a man in this country who would make her need to. She loaded all 3 guns, and she laid them on the table in a row, and she sat in front of them with her good hand flat on the wood, and she thought very quietly, "I am about to become a woman who has done a thing she cannot undo." She did not flinch from the thinking. She got up. She walked to the barn. Cole had old Jericho out of the stall. He had the wagon tipped on its side, and he was working the busted plank loose with a crowbar, and a stubbornness that suggested he had been a carpenter before he had been a lot of other things. "Cole." "Ma'am?" "You said he won't wait till Friday." "No, ma'am." "How long?" "Sundown, maybe. Tomorrow morning at the latest." "That fast?" "He just heard my name, ma'am. He ain't gonna sleep tonight either." She nodded. She watched his hands work the crowbar. He had the kind of hands that did not waste motion. Every pry, every twist, every push of his shoulder went exactly where it needed to go, and no further. And she stood in the barn doorway, and she watched him, and she thought, that is the way my husband used to work, and she had to look away because some thoughts were not safe to think while a man with hazel eyes was bent over a wagon in your barn. Cole. Ma'am. I need to go to town. He stopped. He did not turn around. Today. Today. Mrs. Turner. I know what you're going to say. Then you know I'm going to say it loud. Cole, listen. If I sit on this porch and wait for him to come, I am dead. If I send word to the marshal, I am dead before the rider gets to the county line. I have got one play left, and that play is in town, and I cannot make it from this kitchen. What play? There is a woman in Dust Hollow. Which woman? Ruth Ann Pickering. He turned around at the name. He turned around slow. The school teacher. The school teacher. Mrs. Turner. Cole. Ruth Ann Pickering ain't spoke to a soul in this county in 18 months. I know. She lost her boy. I know, Cole. Hale's men ran him off the road. Everybody in Dust Hollow knows it. Nobody can prove it. And she has not opened her front door since the day they buried him. She'll open it for me. How do you figure? Because she came to my husband's funeral when nobody else in town did. And she stood at the back of the church, and she did not say one word. And when it was over, she put her hand on the back of my neck, and she said, Abigail, when your day comes, you come find me. And then she walked out into the rain and went home, and she has not opened her door since, and today is my day, Cole. He set the crowbar down. He took his hat off. He ran his hand through his hair. He put his hat back on. He looked at her the way a man looks at a horse that is about to jump a fence he is not sure she can clear. I'm coming with you. No. Mrs. Turner, you stay here. You finish that wagon. You move every animal I have got left into the back lot behind the wood line. You set my husband's Winchester on the porch with the safety off, and you watch the cottonwoods, Cole. You watch the cottonwoods because if Cassius Doyle comes back today, he is not coming up the lane. He is coming through the trees. And if he comes while you're gone, then I have hired the right man, and you will know what to do. And if I'm wrong about him, then I have hired the wrong man, and I will bury you next to the milk cow. Now help me hitch the mule. He helped her hitch the mule. He did not put a hand on her back when she climbed up onto the wagon seat. He did not put a hand on her shoulder when he handed her the reins. He stood at Jericho's head, with his palm flat on the mule's nose, and he said one thing very quiet. You come back, ma'am. I always come back, Cole. That ain't an answer. It's the only one I got. She slapped the reins. Old Jericho leaned. The wagon groaned forward, and Abigail Turner rolled out of her own yard for the second time in 2 days, and she did not look back. She was learning not to. The road into Dust Hollow was longer than it had been yesterday. Every cottonwood looked like a hiding place. Every dip in the road looked like an ambush. She kept the colt on the seat beside her under a folded shawl, and her good hand on the reins, and her bad hand pressed against her thigh, and she kept her eyes forward. She did not see a single rider, which was somehow worse than seeing one. She did not stop in the mercantile. She did not stop at the bank. She drove old Jericho straight down the back lane past the schoolhouse that had been closed for a year and a half, past the little white fence that had not been painted since the funeral, and she stopped the wagon at Ruth Ann Pickering's gate. She climbed down. She walked up the path. She raised her good hand to knock. The door opened before her knuckles touched the wood. Ruth Ann Pickering stood in the doorway in a black dress that had not been washed in a long time, and her hair was gray at the temples. In places it had not been gray 2 summers ago, and her eyes were the color of a creek bed in February. She looked at Abigail Turner. She looked at the bandage. She looked at the wagon, at the mule, at the road behind the wagon. Then she said very quiet, "Today is your day." "Yes, ma'am." "Hale." "Yes, ma'am." Ruth Ann Pickering stepped back from the door. "Come in, Abigail." Abigail came in. The kitchen was clean. That was the first thing she noticed. A woman who had not opened her door in 18 months had a clean kitchen, and the cleanness of it told Abigail Turner more about Ruth Ann Pickering than 2 summers of town gossip ever had. This was not a woman who had been hiding. This was a woman who had been waiting. "Sit down, child." "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me everything." She told her everything. She told her about the flour, about Hale on the boards, about the boy with the nickel and the dime, about the milk cow, about the well, about the wheat, about Cassius Doyle in the yard with the boy too young for his rifle, about Ethan Cole. When she said Cole's name, Ruth Ann Pickering's hands went still on the table. "Ethan Cole." "Yes, ma'am." "The cowboy who used to ride for Hale." "Yes, ma'am. He told me himself, this morning, before I asked." "He told you himself?" "Yes, ma'am." Ruth Ann Pickering looked at her for a long moment. Then she got up. She walked to a small chest at the back of the kitchen, the kind of chest a schoolteacher uses to keep her good linens in, and she opened the lid and she took out a bundle of papers tied with a black ribbon. She set the papers in front of Abigail Turner. "Read these." "What are they?" "Read them, Abigail." Abigail untied the black ribbon. The first paper was a letter, dated August of '76, signed at the bottom by a man named Walter Mercer. Walter Mercer had been Margaret Ann Mercer's husband. The letter was addressed to Ruth Ann Pickering. It said that if anything happened to him on the road from Cottonwood Creek, she should know it had been Victor Hale, and she should know that Hale had threatened his wife the week before, and she should know that he had hidden a ledger in a tin box behind the loose stone in the chimney of the abandoned line shack on Skull Ridge. It said the ledger had names in it. It said the ledger had amounts in it. It said the ledger had a list of every man Hale had ever paid to ride through a widow's wheat. Abigail Turner could not breathe. "Mrs. Pickering." "Yes, child. This letter is 12 years old. 12 years and 3 months. Walter Mercer is dead. They found him at the bottom of the Cottonwood Creek Bridge 8 days after he wrote that. The horse was alive. The bridle was cut. The coroner ruled it an accident. You have had this letter for 12 years and 3 months, child. Why have you not, Mrs. Pickering? Why have you not?" "Because I am one woman, Abigail. And the man I would have to take it to is the man whose payroll the sheriff has been on since before my boy was born. And because I had a son. And as long as my son was alive in this county, I could not put that letter in a courthouse and walk out alive, and neither could he. Now," she paused. Her hands were shaking on the table. They were shaking the way a hand shakes when it has been holding still for a very long time and has just been given permission to stop. "Now, child. Now my boy is gone, and I have nothing left in this world that Victor Hale can take from me. And I have been sitting in this kitchen for 18 months, waiting for one woman in this county to walk up my path with the right kind of look on her face. And today, you walked up my path and you have the look, Abigail. You have the look. So you take this letter, and you take this ribbon, and you take these papers, and you go to Skull Ridge." "Mrs. Pickering, you go to Skull Ridge, Abigail. That's 8 miles north." "It is. Hale's men ride that ridge." "They do." "It is going to be dark before I get there." "It is." "Mrs. Pickering, I have a bandaged hand." "You have 2 hands, child, and a man at your homestead who knows where every line shack on Skull Ridge is because he used to ride for the same man we are about to bury under his own paper." Abigail Turner went very still. "Cole. Cole. You want me to take Cole? I want you to take the only man in this county who knows where the chimney is, Abigail, and who knows which stone is the loose one, and who has a reason in this world to want that ledger pulled out of that wall as bad as you do. He told me he never poisoned a well. He didn't. He rode through wheat. He told you the truth. I know because I asked Margaret Ann Mercer's sister 3 years ago. I wrote to her in Fort Collins, and she said her sister told her before she died that the cowboy who rode through her wheat came back to her house 2 weeks later, in the dark. And he stood on her porch with his hat in his hands, and he gave her $62 in cash, which was every dollar Hale had paid him, and he told her he was sorry, and he asked her if there was anything she needed him to do, and she sent him away. She told her sister that night that boy will be back when somebody else needs him. And he is back, Abigail. He is back at your house. And I am telling you, take him to Skull Ridge. Abigail Turner closed her eyes. When she opened them, there were tears in them. She did not let them fall. Mrs. Pickering. Yes, child. Why did you tell me to come find you? At the funeral? Why? Ruth Ann Pickering's mouth moved. Her face moved. Something behind her eyes moved that had not moved in 18 months, and her voice when it came was very small. Because your husband came to my schoolhouse the spring before he died, and he told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should look out for his wife. He said, Ruth, my Abigail is the strongest woman in this county, but she is going to need one friend the day Hale comes for her, and I will not be alive to be that friend. And I told him I would. And I have been keeping that promise for 2 years, Abigail. 2 years. And I am keeping it today. Abigail Turner cried. She cried the way a woman cries when she has just been told that her dead husband saw her future more clearly than she ever did. She cried with both hands on Ruth Ann Pickering's table, and Ruth Ann Pickering reached across and put her old, thin, gray-knuckled hand over Abigail's bandaged one, and she did not say a word. When the crying was done, Abigail Turner stood up. She tied the black ribbon around the papers. She put the papers inside her dress against her skin, where no man would put a hand without losing it. She looked at Ruth Ann Pickering. Mrs. Pickering. Ruth, child, from now on. Ruth. Yes. When this is over. Yes. You are going to come live on my homestead. Ruth Ann Pickering opened her mouth. She closed it. She nodded once sharp and turned her face toward the window so Abigail would not see what was on it. Abigail walked to the door. She stopped with her good hand on the latch. Ruth. Yes, child. Are there other women? A long pause. Yes, Abigail. There are other women. How many? In Dust Hollow alone. Yes. 7. 7. 7 widows, child. 7 women who have lost a husband or a son or a piece of land to Victor Hale in the last 10 years. And every single one of them is sitting in her kitchen right now, waiting for the same thing I was waiting for. Waiting for the woman with the look on her face. Abigail Turner's hand tightened on the latch. After Skull Ridge, she said. After I have that ledger, I am coming back to this house, and you are going to walk me to every one of those 7 doors, and you are going to open them for me, Ruth, and we are going to put an end to him. Yes, child. Do you swear it? On my boy's grave, Abigail. Abigail Turner walked out the door. She climbed up onto the wagon. She drove old Jericho out of Dust Hollow at a pace that was faster than she had ever asked of him, and the bandage on her hand was bleeding through again, and the papers against her ribs were sharp where the corners pressed her skin, and she did not feel the bleeding, and she did not feel the sharpness. She felt her husband. She felt him on the wagon seat beside her. She felt him at her shoulder. She felt him in the cottonwoods. She felt him the way a woman feels a man she loved when the thing he warned her about has finally come, and she said out loud to the road, You knew, you fool. Why did you not tell me yourself? The wind in the cottonwoods did not answer, but old Jericho's ears flicked back toward her, and he picked up his pace without being asked, and Abigail Turner drove home faster than she had any right to. She rolled into her yard at the edge of full dark. Cole was on the porch. The Winchester was across his knees. There was a fresh cut on his cheek, and the sleeve of his shirt was torn at the elbow, and there was a horse she did not recognize tied to her porch rail. She climbed down from the wagon faster than she should have. Cole. I'm fine, ma'am. What happened? 2 riders. Came through the cottonwoods about an hour after you left, just like you said. Cassius. Not Cassius, 2 of his boys, younger ones. They wasn't expecting me to be here, ma'am. They got off their horses real cocky, and they walked up to your porch, and one of them put a hand on your screen door, and I will tell you in plain English what I did to that hand, ma'am, but only after you sit down. The other one rode off. Will he tell? He will. Cole. Yes, ma'am. How long do we have? Couple hours? Maybe less. Cassius will come himself this time. With more men. Then we are not going to be here when he comes. Mrs. Turner. Cole, listen to me. She walked up onto the porch. She stood in front of him. She pulled the bundle of papers out of her dress with her good hand, and she held them up between them, and she said, Skull Ridge, 8 miles north. Line shack, loose stone in the chimney. There is a ledger in a tin box behind that stone, and that ledger has every name and every dollar. Victor Hale has paid. Every man who ever rode through a widow's wheat in this territory for the last 12 years. And there is a letter from a dead man telling us where to find it, and I need you to tell me, Cole. I need you to tell me right now. Do you know the line shack I am talking about? Ethan Cole had gone still on the porch. The kind of still a man goes when he has been waiting 12 years for somebody to say a sentence to him, and somebody just said it. Mrs. Turner. Yes. I helped build that chimney. What? The summer of '74. Hale paid me and 2 other men to put up that line shack. I was the one who set the chimney stones. I set the loose stone myself. I did not know what it was for, ma'am. I was 21 years old. I thought it was just a place for him to keep cigars. I have not been to that shack in 14 years, Mrs. Turner, but I could find that loose stone in the dark with both eyes shut and one hand tied. Yes, ma'am. I know the line shack. She put the papers back into her dress. Saddle up, Cole. Yes, ma'am. We ride in 15 minutes. You take the buckskin. I take Jericho. We go up the back trail behind the wood line, not the road. We do not light a lantern. We do not stop. We do not speak. If we are seen, we ride harder. If we are followed, you turn your horse and you take the followers, and I keep going. We are not dying tonight, Cole, but if one of us has to, it is going to be the one of us who is not carrying these papers, which is you. Yes, ma'am. And Cole. Ma'am. When this is done, when we have got that ledger, when I have walked it into the territorial marshal's office in Cheyenne, and I have dropped it on his desk, and I have watched him read the name on the top of page 1. When we have got Victor Hale in chains, and Cassius Doyle in chains, and every man in that ledger in chains, when that day comes, Cole, ma'am, you and I are going to sit down at my kitchen table, and I am going to ask you something, and you are going to answer me yes or no. And I do not want you thinking about the answer between now and then. I want you doing your work and watching my back and keeping your hat on your head. The thinking can wait. The asking can wait. Tonight is not for thinking and asking. Tonight is for riding. Do you understand me, Mr. Cole? Ethan Cole stood up off the porch chair. He did not smile. He did not nod. He did not tip his hat. He took the Winchester off his knees and he set it against the post, and he picked up his rifle scabbard and his canteen and his saddlebag, and he said in a voice that was the steadiest voice she had ever heard out of a man in her life, I understand you, Mrs. Turner. She walked into the kitchen. She buckled her husband's gun belt. She picked up the Colt. She picked up the little belly gun, and she slid it into a pocket sewn inside the seam of her dress that her husband had made for her himself the summer before he died. The summer he had ridden over to Ruth Ann Pickering's schoolhouse, without telling her the summer he had asked a woman he barely knew to look out for the wife he loved when he was gone. She walked back out onto the porch. Old Jericho was already saddled. The buckskin was already saddled. Cole was already up reins in one hand and his rifle across the saddle bow in the other, and the moon was coming up over the cottonwoods behind him, and he looked down at her from the saddle, and he said, Mrs. Turner? Mr. Cole? Your hand? What about it? It's bleeding through again. I know. Ma'am, you cannot ride 8 miles in the dark with Cole. Ma'am. Ride. He rode. She rode. They went up the back trail behind the wood line at a pace that was reckless for the dark, and not reckless enough for what was chasing them. And the moon came up full over the prairie, and the cottonwoods threw long black shadows that looked like men where no men were. And Abigail Turner kept one hand on the reins, and one hand pressed flat against the bundle of papers inside her dress, and she rode toward Skull Ridge with the wind in her face and her dead husband's voice in her ear, and 7 widows behind her she had not yet met, and one cowboy in front of her, she had not yet decided what to do with. She was 3 miles out when she heard the first hoofbeats behind them. Not one horse, not two. 6. Coming hard, coming fast. Coming up the back trail Cassius Doyle should not have known about. Cole heard them at the same second she did. He turned in the saddle. He looked back. He turned forward. He did not slow his horse. He did not speed it up. He pulled the buckskin up alongside Jericho, and he leaned across the gap between them, and he said one sentence low and clear and final. "Ma'am, you ride. I'll hold the trail." Abigail Turner's heart stopped. "Cole." "You ride, Mrs. Turner." "Cole, you cannot." "I helped build that chimney, ma'am. I do not get to be the one who pulls that ledger out of it. You do. So you ride. You ride to Skull Ridge. You find the loose stone. You take the box. You go to Cheyenne. And when you get to my kitchen table for that question." He stopped. He looked at her in the moonlight, with his hat pushed back, and the cut on his cheek black with dried blood. And Abigail Turner saw something in his face that made her bandaged hand close so hard around the reins that the stitches in her palm tore open all over again. "Ask it anyway, Mrs. Turner. Ask it of whoever's at the table. If it ain't me, ask it of the moon. But ask it. Promise me you'll ask it." The hoofbeats behind them were closer. She could hear the men shouting now. She could hear Cassius Doyle's voice. She could hear her own pulse in her bad hand. "Cole." "Promise me, ma'am." "I promise." He pulled the buckskin's head sideways. He kicked the buckskin into a turn. He drew the Winchester out of the scabbard, and he levered around into the chamber, and he rode straight back down the trail toward the 6 horses coming the other way, and Abigail Turner kicked Jericho into a run. She had not known the old mule still had in him, and she did not look back. She did not look back. She did not look back. But somewhere behind her in the dark on the back trail behind her wood line with the moon full over the cottonwoods and the wind hot on her shoulders, she heard the first rifle crack, and then the second, and then the third, and then a long, sick silence, and then Abigail Turner, 304 pounds of widow and grief and prairie iron, with a bundle of dead men's papers against her ribs, and a dead husband's voice in her ear, and a homestead 7 miles behind her, she might never see again, kicked old Jericho one more time, and rode for Skull Ridge alone. She rode. She rode the way a woman rides when there is a man behind her. She has not allowed herself to grieve yet, because grieving him would mean stopping. And stopping would mean dying, and dying would mean every widow in 7 kitchens, still sitting in the dark. She did not let herself count the rifle cracks. She did not let herself count the silence after. She did not let herself count anything at all except the hoofbeats of old Jericho underneath her, and the miles between her shoulders, and the loose stone, and the bundle of papers slipping warm against her ribs. 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile. The ridge came up out of the dark, the way a body comes up out of cold water, slow sudden all at once. The line shack sat on the back side of it like a thing that had forgotten itself. No light, no sound, no men. Just a sagging roof and a chimney that had been standing 14 years longer than the boy who had built it had been sober. She slid off Jericho before he had stopped moving. Her bad knee buckled. She caught herself on his shoulder. She did not say sorry to it. She did not have time to say sorry to anything tonight. She drew the Colt. She walked the perimeter once. Quick, quiet. The way her husband had taught her to walk a barn the year of the cougar. Nothing. No fresh tracks, no fresh cigar. Hale had not been here in months, maybe years. Maybe Hale had stopped coming to this shack the day he had stopped trusting Ethan Cole, and that thought settled in her chest like a coin dropping into a tin. If Cole was telling the truth about the chimney, Cole had been telling the truth about everything. She kicked the door open with her good leg. The smell hit her first. Mice. Old smoke. A long, dry, abandoned kind of nothing. She holstered the Colt. She struck a match against her thumbnail. She held it up. The chimney was on the back wall. She crossed the room in 4 steps. She knelt down 3rd time in 3 days, and she did not feel any of those previous knees in this one, because this knee was different. This knee was the knee a woman puts down on purpose, and she ran her good hand along the chimney stones from the bottom up. 1st row, set. 2nd row, set. 3rd row, loose. Her breath caught. The stone moved under her fingers like it had been waiting. Like a tooth in an old man's jaw, ready to come out the second somebody stopped pretending to chew. She got her thumbnail under the bottom edge. She worked it. The stone slid out an inch, 2 inches, 3. She set it on the floor. She put her good hand into the hole. Her fingers closed on tin. She pulled it out. A flat tobacco tin. Dented. Cold. Heavier than it looked. She sat down on the floor of the line shack with her back against the chimney, and the tin in her lap, and her bandaged hand pressed against her chest, where her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth, and she pried the lid off. There was a ledger inside. Black leather. The kind a banker uses. Hand-stitched at the spine. She opened it. The first page had a single line written in a careful slanted hand. V. Hale Acquisitions beginning August 1874. She turned the page. Her own dead husband's name was not in this book. Her husband had not been a Hale man. Her husband had been the kind of man who would have died before he took Hale's money, and her husband had died, and she did not know yet whether Hale had killed him too, but she would know before the night was out, because the names in this book went 4 columns wide and 12 years deep, and every man Victor Hale had ever paid for anything was in it. Cole's name was on page 3. E. Cole. 4 entries. Summer of '76. $62 total. The exact number Ruth had said. The exact number he had walked back to the Mercer porch and put into Margaret Ann's hand. Abigail Turner closed her eyes. She closed them for 1 beat. 2. Then she opened them, and she shut the ledger, and she put the ledger inside her dress against the bundle of papers, and she stood up. That was when she heard the horse. 1 horse. Coming up the backside of the ridge. Slow. Quiet. The way a man rides when he does not want to be heard. She drew the colt. She walked to the door. She did not open it. She put her ear against the wood. The horse stopped on the other side. A boot hit the ground. Then another. Then a slow, deliberate 3-step approach toward the door, and Abigail Turner thumbed back the hammer on her husband's colt, and she said through the wood, "That's far enough." The boots stopped. A voice came back through the wood. A voice she knew. "Mrs. Turner." Her heart stopped. "Cole." "Open the door, ma'am." She tore the door open. Ethan Cole was on her threshold with his hat in his hand and his shirt soaked black from his collarbone to his belt. And there was a hole in him somewhere. She could not see it in the dark, but she could see the shape his shoulder had taken, and she could see the way his right arm was hanging, and his face was the gray color of a man who has bled longer than he should have. "Cole, you are bleeding." "Ma'am." "Get in here, get in here, get in here right now." "Mrs. Turner." "Cole, sit down." "Did you find it?" She froze. "Did you find it, ma'am?" She put her hand on his chest. "Yes," she said. "I found it." His knees went. She caught him. She caught him, and she should not have been able to. A 300-pound widow, with a bandaged hand and a bad knee, should not have been able to catch a 170-pound cowboy on the way to the floor. But a woman who has been told her whole life she is too heavy for this world has built a back that can carry things other women cannot. And Abigail Turner caught Ethan Cole, and she lowered him to the dirt floor of the line shack, and she peeled his shirt back from his shoulder with her good hand, and she said, "Cole." "Ma'am." "This is not bad." "Yes, it is, ma'am." "It is not." "Mrs. Turner, I have been bled by enough men to know how bad it is. It is bad." "You listen to me, Ethan Cole." It was the first time she had used his Christian name. He looked up at her. "Yes, ma'am." "I have not asked the question yet." "No, ma'am." "And I am not asking it tonight." "No, ma'am." "Which means you do not get to die tonight. Do you understand me? You do not get to die before I have asked the question. I do not care how bad it is. I do not care how much blood you have lost. I do not care if Cassius Doyle himself put 6 rounds in you and signed his name on the wound. You are not dying in this shack because I am not done with you, Ethan Cole, and a woman who is not done with a man does not lose him to a shoulder." His mouth twitched. A smile. Half of one. The first one she had seen from him in 3 days. "Mrs. Turner." "What?" "It ain't my shoulder." She looked down. It was not his shoulder. The shoulder was where the blood had soaked through. The wound was lower, below his ribs on the right side, where a bullet had gone in clean and had not, as far as she could tell with one good hand and a struck match, come out the back. "Cole?" "Yes, ma'am." "How long ago?" "Hour. Hour and a half." "How many men?" "6. How many of them got past you?" "None, ma'am." She closed her eyes. She opened them. "Cassius." "Took my horse and rode off the other way. He is not coming for you tonight, Mrs. Turner. He is going to Hale." "Why?" "Because he saw the other 5 drop, ma'am. And he is not the kind of man who dies for another man's money. He is the kind of man who carries the news back to the man whose money it is, and he lets that man decide who dies next." "How long until Hale rides?" "Sunup, maybe. Then we have got until sunup to get you to a doctor and get this ledger to Cheyenne." "Mrs. Turner, do not." "Mrs. Turner, listen. Do not, Cole. You cannot do both." The line shack was very quiet. "You cannot do both, ma'am. Cheyenne is 60 miles. There is no doctor between here and there who is not on Hale's payroll. The only doctor in this territory who is not on Hale's payroll is in Cheyenne, and Cheyenne is where the ledger needs to go, and Cheyenne is where I need to go, and I cannot ride 60 miles, ma'am. Not tonight. Not with this in me." "Then we are not going to Cheyenne tonight." "Mrs. Turner." "We are going to Ruth Ann Pickering's." He blinked. "What? Ruth Ann Pickering, the schoolteacher, 10 miles, back the way I came. She will hide you. She will hide the ledger, Cole, in the same chest she has been hiding her dead husband's letter in for 12 years. And Hale will not think to look in the schoolteacher's house, because Hale stopped thinking about Ruth Ann Pickering 18 months ago when he ran her boy off the road and she did not come for him. He thinks she is broken, Cole. He thinks she is done. He has not been to her front door since the day they buried her son, and he is not going to her front door tonight, and that is where we are going. And in the morning. In the morning I am riding for Cheyenne with the ledger. Ruth will keep you alive. I will keep my husband's promise, which apparently was a promise he made to her 2 summers ago without telling me, and which she has been keeping ever since, and which it is now my turn to keep back." Cole's eyes were closing. She slapped his face. "Not hard. Hard enough." "Cole?" "Ma'am?" "You stay with me." "Ma'am?" "You stay with me, Ethan Cole. I am not telling you twice." She pulled him up. She got him standing. She got him out the door. She got him onto Jericho. She could not lift him onto the buckskin. The buckskin had run off with his last bolt of energy. And Jericho was the only horse on this ridge. And she walked beside the mule with one hand on Cole's good leg to keep him in the saddle. And she walked the 8 miles back toward Dust Hollow on a bad knee with a bandaged hand and a tin ledger against her ribs, and she did not stop one time. She got to Ruth Ann Pickering's back gate at the gray hour before sunup. Ruth was already on the porch. Ruth was dressed. Ruth had a shotgun across her arm and a coffee pot in her other hand, and the look of a woman who had not slept and had not expected to. She saw Abigail. She saw Cole. She saw the blood. She set the coffee pot down. "Abigail." "Ruth, I need—" "Bring him." "Ruth, the ledger." "Bring him, child." They brought him. They got him into the back room. They got him onto the schoolteacher's spare bed. A narrow iron bed that had been her son's. And Abigail did not say anything about the bed, and Ruth did not say anything about the bed. And they laid Ethan Cole down on the quilt the dead boy had slept under. And Ruth put her hand flat on the cowboy's forehead, and she said one sentence that Abigail Turner would carry with her for the rest of her life. "This one is not dying in my house, Abigail. I have had enough men die in my house." She turned to the cabinet. She took out a bottle of whiskey, a roll of clean linen, a curved needle, a spool of horsehair thread, and a pair of long iron forceps Abigail had not known a schoolteacher would own. "Ruth." "Yes, child." You have done this before. I was a nurse in the war, Abigail. Before I was a teacher, I was a nurse. I have pulled 41 bullets out of 41 men in my life. This will be 42. Now go. Ruth, go. Saddle my horse. The bay in the back. He is fresher than your mule, and he is faster than your mule, and you are not riding 60 miles to Cheyenne on Jericho, child. You would be there next Tuesday. The bay will get you there by sundown. You take the ledger, and you take the letter, and you take this. She crossed to the chest. She opened it. She took out a sealed envelope brown with age addressed in a careful slanted hand. This is Walter Mercer's original letter to the territorial marshal. The one he never got to send. I have had it 12 years. 12 years and 3 months. The marshal in Cheyenne is named Briggs. Henry Briggs. He is not on Hale's payroll because he was at Antietam with my husband, and he has hated cowards his whole life, and I have written him 3 letters in the last 12 years, and I have burned every one of them because my boy was alive. Now my boy is not alive. And you are going to put this letter in his hand, Abigail. His hand-child. Not a deputy. Not a clerk. His. Ruth. Yes. Cole said. I do not care what Cole said. Cole is bleeding on my dead son's bed, and I am about to dig a Hale bullet out of him, child. And the cowboy is not telling either one of us what to do this morning. You ride. Ruth, the 7 women. Ruth Ann Pickering stopped with her hand on the linens. She looked up. Her face was wet. Abigail had not seen it get wet. But it was wet now, and Ruth's voice when it came was the voice of a woman who has been holding a thing in for so long that the holding had become a second spine. I will walk to every one of those 7 doors today, Abigail. I will walk to every one of them with this shotgun across my arm, and I will tell every one of those women what is in your dress. And I will tell them what we are doing, and I will tell them which of them needs to leave Dust Hollow before noon, and which of them needs to stay, and which of them needs to stand in their front yard with a rifle and not move when Hale's men come through. I have been a woman in a kitchen for 18 months, child. Today, I am a woman in a war. Now ride. Abigail Turner kissed Ruth Ann Pickering on the forehead. She had never done that before. She did not explain it. Ruth did not ask her to. She walked into the back room. She knelt one more time, 4th knee in 3 days, and her bad leg was not even noticing anymore, and she put her good hand on Ethan Cole's face. Cole? His eyes opened, just barely. Ma'am? I am riding to Cheyenne. Yes, ma'am. Ruth is going to fix you. Yes, ma'am. You stay alive. Yes, ma'am. You hear me, Ethan Cole? You stay alive. You do not have permission to die. I have not asked the question yet. I am coming back. I am coming back to this house in this town, to this bed if I have to, and you are going to be in it. Breathing, cussing, complaining about the broth. Do you hear me? His eyes closed. For 1 second she thought he was gone. Then his lips moved. I hear you, Abigail. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. She put her forehead against his for 1 long heartbeat. Then she stood up. She did not look back. She walked out the back door. She saddled Ruth's bay. She tightened the cinch with her good hand and her teeth. She put her foot in the stirrup. She swung up. The bay shifted under her, surprised, maybe by her weight, and then settled into himself the way a good horse settles when he understands what is being asked of him. She put her bandaged hand flat against the bundle inside her dress. The ledger. Walter Mercer's letter. The dead man's last words. 60 miles to Cheyenne. Sun up behind her. A cowboy in a dead boy's bed at her back. 7 widows in 7 kitchens about to open their 7 doors. A man in a polished black boot somewhere in Dust Hollow, waking up to news he was not going to like. Abigail Turner kicked the bay into a gallop. She rode out of Ruth Ann Pickering's back gate at full sun. She rode east on the Cheyenne road with a tin ledger pressed against her ribs and a dead man's letter pressed against her heart and one good hand wrapped tight in the reins. And she did not stop for the toll bridge, and she did not stop for the way station, and she did not stop for the man in the homespun jacket who tried to wave her down at the Third Creek crossing. She did not stop, and she did not stop, and she did not stop. She rode straight into the door of the Territorial Marshal's office in Cheyenne at 4 minutes to sundown. The clerk at the front desk looked up. He looked at her. He looked at her bandaged hand. He looked at the dust on her face, and the blood on her sleeve, and the ledger she was holding in front of her chest, like a thing that might bite. He opened his mouth to ask her business. She did not let him. "Henry Briggs," she said. "Ma'am, the marshal is Henry Briggs." A door opened at the back of the office. A man stepped out. Iron gray, square-shouldered. A scar across the bridge of his nose. The kind of face a man earns at Antietam and keeps for the rest of his life. He looked at her. She looked at him. She held up the ledger. She held up the letter. She said one sentence. "My name is Abigail Turner. I have come from Dust Hollow. I am the widow of Samuel Turner. I was sent to you by Ruth Ann Pickering, the widow of Captain James Pickering, who I believe served with you in the 17th Pennsylvania. I have in my hand a ledger belonging to a man named Victor Hale, and a letter written 12 years ago by a man named Walter Mercer, and between them they will hang 7 men in this territory, and one of them is a sheriff." The clerk stopped writing. The clerk stopped breathing. Henry Briggs looked at the ledger. He looked at the letter. He looked at Abigail Turner. Then he looked past her at the clerk, and he said in a voice that was very quiet and very flat, "Lock the front door. Pull the curtains. Saddle 6 horses. Wire the federal marshal in Laramie. Move." The clerk moved. Henry Briggs looked back at Abigail. He took his hat off. He held it in front of his chest with both hands. "Mrs. Turner," he said. "Marshal. You have ridden a long way." "Yes, sir." "Come inside, ma'am. Come inside." Abigail Turner walked into the back office of the Territorial Marshal of Wyoming with a tin ledger in one hand and a dead man's letter in the other, and a bandage that had bled all the way through twice, and she sat down in the chair across from Henry Briggs's desk, and for the first time in 2 summers and 3 days, Abigail Turner let her shoulders down. Outside, the sun set on Cheyenne, 60 miles west in Dust Hollow. Victor Hale was just beginning to understand that the 7 doors he had spent 10 years keeping closed had all opened at the same time, and he had not heard the worst of it yet. Henry Briggs read the ledger by lamplight. He read it the way a man reads a letter from his dead son, slow, carefully, page by page, with one hand flat on the paper and the other hand at his mouth, and he did not say a word for 40 minutes. Abigail Turner sat across the desk from him with a cup of coffee gone cold in her good hand, and her bandaged one in her lap, and she did not push him. A woman who had ridden 60 miles to put a book in front of a man did not need to push him to read it. When he was done, he closed the ledger. He set both his palms flat on it. He looked up at her. "Mrs. Turner." "Marshal." "There are 61 names in this book." "Yes, sir." "There is a sheriff in it." "Yes, sir." "There is a judge in it." "Yes, sir." "There is a state senator in it." "Yes, sir." "Mrs. Turner." "Marshal." "I have wanted Victor Hale for 9 years." "I figured." "I have not been able to touch him for 9 years." "I know." "Do you understand, ma'am, what you have just put on this desk? I understand it cost a man named Walter Mercer his life 12 years ago. I understand it cost a boy named Pickering his life 18 months ago. I understand it has cost me my milk cow and my well and a piece of my hand, and tonight it may cost me a cowboy on a schoolteacher's bed 60 miles west of here. I understand exactly what is on this desk, Marshal. The question I rode here to ask is, what are you going to do with it?" Henry Briggs stood up. He walked to the door of the back office. He opened it. He spoke 3 sentences to the clerk. Then he came back to the desk and he sat back down, and he looked at her with an expression that no man in 2 summers had used on Abigail Turner. It was the expression of a man looking at an equal. "Mrs. Turner." "Yes, sir. At first light, I am riding for Dust Hollow with 12 United States Marshals out of Laramie, 2 federal warrants out of Denver, and a writ that suspends the office of the sheriff of your county effective the moment my horse crosses the town line. Hale will be in irons by noon. The sheriff will be in irons by noon. Cassius Doyle will be in irons by noon, or he will be dead, and that part is up to him. Yes, sir? There is one thing I need from you. Name it. I need you to ride back with us. She closed her eyes. She kept them closed. 60 miles she had ridden. 60 miles in a day on a knee that had not been right since she was 26. 60 miles back tomorrow on a borrowed bay with a federal posse into a town where Victor Hale would be waiting with whatever men he had left. She opened her eyes. Marshal. Ma'am. There is a man in Dust Hollow with a bullet in him. I know, ma'am. You told me. He was shot keeping 6 men off the back trail to Skull Ridge. He was shot so I could find what is on your desk. He is on a schoolteacher's bed in the back of her house, and the schoolteacher is digging a Hale bullet out of him by candlelight, and I do not know if he is alive right now, and I will not know until I get back. Yes, ma'am. I am riding back with you, Marshal. Not because you asked, because he is there. And because if Hale gets 1 minute of warning in the next 12 hours, the first place he is going is the schoolteacher's house, and the second place he is going is the schoolteacher's back room. And I am not letting Victor Hale put a hand on Ethan Cole while I am sitting in Cheyenne drinking coffee. Henry Briggs almost smiled. He did not. Henry Briggs was not a smiling man. But the corner of his mouth moved, and he picked up his pen, and he wrote one line on the bottom of his deputizing book, and he turned it around for her to sign. What is this? Special Deputy Wyoming Territory. Effective sunrise. You are riding back with us under Federal Commission, Mrs. Turner. Not as a witness, as an officer, so that when we walk into Hale's parlor, you are walking in with a star on your dress. She stared at the line. Marshal? Sign it, ma'am. She signed it. Her bandaged hand left a smear of pink on the paper next to her name. Henry Briggs did not blot it. That stays, he said. Stays. On the file, in the Territorial Archives. 100 years from now, ma'am, somebody is going to pull this paper out, and they are going to see the blood next to your name, and they are going to know what it cost you. That stays. She did not weep. She had ridden 60 miles past weeping. But something behind her sternum cracked the way it had cracked on the porch when Cole had told her about his mama in the road, and she pressed her good hand flat against the front of her dress, against the place where the ledger had ridden against her ribs all day, and she said very quiet, Yes, Marshal. They rode at sunup. 12 United States Marshals, 1 Territorial Marshal, 1 Special Deputy on a borrowed bay with a bandaged hand. They rode the Cheyenne Road west, at a pace Henry Briggs set and no man complained about, and they were at the Dust Hollow town line by 2 in the afternoon, and Abigail Turner rode at Henry Briggs's right shoulder all the way in. The town saw them coming. The town stopped. The boardwalk that had laughed at her 3 days ago was not laughing now. The 2 old men outside the feed store were not pretending to play checkers. The man who had hollered workhorse in a dress was not on his porch. He had gone inside the second he had seen the badges, and his curtain was twitching, and Abigail Turner saw it twitch, and she did not turn her head. Victor Hale was in his office above the bank. Henry Briggs went up the stairs alone. He came down the stairs with Victor Hale in front of him in irons. Hale's hair was no longer oiled. His shirt was not tucked in. His polished black boots were polished, but the man inside them was not. He walked down the boardwalk with his wrists chained in front of him, and his eyes pointed at the dirt, and the whole town watched him walk, and not one man on the boardwalk said a word. Then he saw Abigail Turner. He stopped. Henry Briggs let him stop. Henry Briggs did not even put a hand on his back. Victor Hale lifted his face. Mrs. Turner. Mr. Hale. You did this. No, sir, you did this. I just carried it 60 miles and put it on a desk. You were on your knees 3 days ago. Yes, sir, I was. And now I am standing, Mr. Hale. And you are not. And that is the difference between a woman who has been on her knees long enough and a man who never knew he was about to be. Hale's mouth moved. Whatever he was going to say, he did not say it. Henry Briggs put one finger between Hale's shoulder blades and pushed, and Victor Hale walked the rest of the boardwalk with his eyes on the dirt, and Abigail Turner did not watch him go. She turned her horse. She rode for Ruth Ann Pickering's house. She rode through the back lane and up to the little white fence, and she swung off the bay before he had stopped, and her bad knee buckled, and she did not catch herself, and she went down on both hands in the dirt of the path. The papers were no longer in her dress. The papers were in Cheyenne. There was nothing pressing against her ribs except her own heart, and her own heart was beating so hard she could not hear the door of the schoolhouse open behind her. She heard the boots. 2 sets. One was Ruth. The other was a man's tread, slow, uneven, favoring one side. She looked up. Ethan Cole was standing on Ruth Ann Pickering's porch. He had a shirt on, clean, white, buttoned wrong by one buttonhole because Ruth had buttoned it for him, and Ruth's hands had been shaking. He had a sling on his right arm. He had a bandage across his ribs that she could see at the open collar. He was the color a man is when he has lost too much blood and gotten some of it back, and he was leaning against the post the way a man leans when he is not yet sure his legs are his own. But he was standing. "Cole?" "Ma'am." "You are standing. I told you I would, ma'am." "You did not tell me anything of the kind, Ethan Cole. You told me you were dying." "I might have been wrong about that, ma'am." "You were wrong, Cole, you were wrong." She got up off the path. She walked up to the porch on a knee that did not work, and a hand that was bleeding through, and a back that had carried her through 60 miles each way in 2 days, and she walked up the 3 steps, and she stopped 1 foot in front of him, and she looked up into his face. Ruth Ann Pickering was standing in the doorway behind him. Ruth Ann Pickering was crying without making a sound. Ruth Ann Pickering reached out and pulled the door shut very softly, and went back inside her house and left the 2 of them alone on the porch. Abigail Turner looked at Cole. "I am going to ask the question." "Yes, ma'am." "I told you I would not ask it tonight." "It ain't tonight anymore, Mrs. Turner." "No, it isn't." She took a breath. She took a long, shaking, full-chested breath. And the breath was the breath of a woman who had been carrying something for 2 summers, and a dead man, and a whole town, and was for the first time putting it down. "Ethan Cole." "Abigail, will you marry me?" A long pause. His good hand came up. It came up slow, the way a man's hand comes up when he has been waiting for permission to use it for 3 days, and he put his good hand against the side of her face. Not the cheek, the jaw, the place where the flower had streaked 3 days ago in the street, the place where she had wiped the dirt away with a bleeding palm, and he held her face like a man holds a thing he is finally allowed to touch. "Mrs. Turner." "Mr. Cole." "I was going to ask you first." "You were too slow." "I was." "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes, Abigail. That is a yes 1,000 times. That is a yes I have been carrying since the second I dismounted in that street and you told me to stop. That is a yes, ma'am. That is a yes." She did not cry. She had been done with crying for a day and a half, but she put her forehead against his, careful of his shoulder, careful of his ribs, careful of every bandage on his body, and she stood on Ruth Ann Pickering's porch with her bandaged hand flat against Ethan Cole's chest and his good hand on her jaw, and for 1 whole minute the 2 of them did not speak. Then she stepped back. "Cole." "Ma'am." "There is one more thing to do." "I figured there would be, ma'am." "I need you to be able to walk." "I can walk, ma'am." "Slow. Slow." She held out her good hand. He took it. They walked off Ruth Ann Pickering's porch, and they walked down the back lane, and they walked into the main street of Dust Hollow, with the federal marshals still loading prisoners into the wagon at the far end. And the town watched them. The man who had hollered workhorse watched them. The boy who had taken her dime watched them. The 2 old men outside the feed store watched them. Every face that had laughed at her 3 days ago in that street watched the heavy widow and the bandaged cowboy walk down the middle of it, hand in hand, slow, deliberate, neither one of them looking left or right. Ruth Ann Pickering came down off her porch. 6 other women stepped out of 6 other doorways. They walked into the street one by one. Mary Ellen Sutter, whose husband had been the first man Hale had ever ruined. Hattie Beaumont, whose son had disappeared on a Hale errand and had never come home. The widow Cassidy, who had not spoken his name in 11 years. Eulalie Park. Jane Doyle, who shared a last name with Cassius and was no kin to him, and had cleaned other people's kitchens for 9 years to prove it. Sarah Pierce. Old Lottie Vance, who had buried 2 husbands and was the oldest woman in 3 counties. 7 widows. 7 doors. 7 women in 7 different black dresses walking out into the same street at the same time, falling in behind Abigail Turner and Ethan Cole without a word. Henry Briggs saw them coming. Henry Briggs took his hat off. Every federal marshal on that street took his hat off. They walked the length of Dust Hollow with 8 people behind them, and no one said a word, and they stopped in front of the little white church at the south end of town. And Abigail Turner turned around, and she faced the 7 women, and she said in a voice that the whole street heard, "This town has watched a great many things in the last 10 years. The street was quiet. It has watched widows lose homesteads. It has watched boys get run off roads. It has watched wives bury husbands they should not have had to bury. It has watched a great many things, and it has said nothing, and it has done nothing, and it has laughed at a woman in the dirt." She drew a breath. "That ends today." A pause. This land, this whole valley is going to be put back together. Not by Mr. Hale, not by his bank, not by any one man. It is going to be put back together by the women he tried to break and could not, and by the men who have learned how to stand beside them. We are forming a cooperative. As of this afternoon, every widow in this valley owns a share. Every homestead inside the cooperative shares the well, the wagon, the harvest, and the harvest price. No man buys a widow out cheap in this valley ever again. No bank takes a homestead from a woman whose husband is 2 summers in the ground ever again. Not in Dust Hollow. Not in this county. Not in this territory. A beat. And any man who has a problem with that any man is welcome to walk down this street to Marshal Briggs and say so to his face. Not one man on the boardwalk moved. Abigail Turner turned to Ruth Ann Pickering. "Ruth." "Yes, child." "You are the school teacher of Dust Hollow." "I have not taught a child in 18 months, Abigail." "You are going to teach again starting Monday. The schoolhouse opens at 8 o'clock. Every girl in this valley is welcome. Every widow is welcome. And once a week on Saturdays the schoolhouse is going to be a meeting hall, and the women of this valley are going to sit in it. And we are going to vote Ruth. We are going to vote on what happens to our land with our names in our mouths. Will you teach?" Ruth Ann Pickering's hand came up to her face. "Yes, Abigail, I will teach." Abigail turned to the church. The preacher had come out onto the steps. He had his Bible under his arm. He had a look on his face that said he had been watching the same things for 10 years that everybody else had been watching, and that he had said nothing, and that he was possibly finally prepared to say something. "Reverend?" "Mrs. Turner." "How soon can you marry 2 people?" The preacher looked at Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole did not move. The preacher looked at Abigail. He swallowed. "Today, ma'am. I can do it today." "How about right now?" "Right now, ma'am." "Reverend, this man has a bullet hole in him from yesterday, and a sling on his arm, and I have ridden 120 miles in 2 days, on a knee that has not been right since '81. And the 7 women behind me have been waiting 18 months to stand inside a church for a reason that was not a funeral. So yes, sir, right now, if you would be so kind." The preacher opened his Bible. The 7 widows came up the church steps behind them. Henry Briggs took off his hat at the back of the chapel. The federal marshals stood along the back wall in 2 rows. Old Lottie Vance, who was 81 years old and had buried 2 men she had loved and had not been to a wedding in 26 years, stood in the second pew and held Mary Ellen Sutter's hand, and she did not let go of it once. Abigail Turner stood at the altar in a dress that was torn at the hem and stained at the shoulder and bloodied at the cuff. Ethan Cole stood beside her with his shirt buttoned wrong by one buttonhole and a sling on his arm. The preacher said the words. They said the words back. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan Cole leaned down with his good hand on her waist, finally on her waist. And she let it stay there, and she did not flinch, and she did not pull away. And he kissed Abigail Turner Cole on the mouth in the little white church at the south end of Dust Hollow. And the 7 widows behind them stood up, all 7 of them, and Lottie Vance was the first to clap. The clap echoed off the church walls. 6 other women joined her. Henry Briggs joined them. The federal marshals joined. Even the preacher halfway through saying, "I now pronounce you," set his Bible down and joined. And out on the boardwalk through the open church doors, the man who had hollered workhorse in a dress 3 days ago took his hat off in his own front yard because the wind had taken it down the street, and he had not been quick enough to catch it. And he stood there, bareheaded, as a heavy woman walked out of a church on a cowboy's good arm with 7 widows behind her and a federal posse beside her, and he did not laugh. He did not laugh ever again. Months later, on a quiet summer night on a homestead with a new well and a mended wagon and a fence line that ran clear to the cottonwoods, Abigail Turner Cole sat on her own porch with her husband's good hand in her bandaged one healed, now scar puckered white across the palm, and she watched the sun go down over a valley that belonged for the first time in 12 years to the women who had bled for it. Ruth Ann Pickering's lamp was lit at the schoolhouse 3 miles east. The 7 kitchens of 7 widows had 7 doors that opened now. Old Jericho was in his stall with 2 new milk cows for company, and the well water came up clean and cold and smelling of nothing but stone. Ethan Cole squeezed her hand. "Abigail." "Yes." "You done good." She looked out at the prairie. She looked at the cottonwoods her husband had planted the year they were married. She looked at the wheat her new husband had helped her bring in with one good arm, and the help of 7 women, and a federal marshal, and a town that had learned finally to say her name without laughing. And Abigail Turner Cole, 304 pounds of widow and prairie iron, and the quiet, unbreakable truth that a woman's worth is not measured by the weight she carries, but by the weight she refuses to set down, said the sentence that closed every door that had ever been closed against her, and opened every door that had ever been closed against any woman in Dust Hollow. "No, Cole, we done good." A pause, a breath, the sun behind the cottonwoods, and no woman in this valley will ever kneel in the dirt alone again.